All right, so welcome back to another episode of Beyond the Practice. Today I'm joined by Jake Greenspan, director of the Floortime Center, where their personalized programs are renowned for fostering developmental progress in children with various challenges. Jake's extensive experience, including co-authoring books and developing the Floortime Manual, underscores his commitment to advancing developmental support. Welcome to the show, Jake.
Thank you very much for having me.
All right, so we'll start a little bit of the backstory, about the personal side of everything, but so we'll start. What inspired you to continue your father's legacy through the Four-Time Center?
It's a good question. In large part, it was him nudging me. um, and I mean, it was something that I'd always kind of fallen into working with him or his colleagues. Actually, over like the summers when I was home from college or even in high school, I started doing some research with him and different things. To be honest, none of it really spoke to me that much. But I actually became a classroom teacher after college and focused on, or taught at a school that focused on helping kids with learning differences. So ADHD, ADD, dyslexia, dysgraphia, a whole lot of behavioral and emotional difficulties. And I saw that there were some great things happening educationally, but I also saw that most practices were not based on helping kids actually grow and progress, but actually just work around the challenges. And create systems for them so they didn't have to actually strengthen their executive functioning because someone else was doing all the planning for them and teaching them how to plan, but that's not actually strengthening their ability to plan. Um, and so I left there kind of a little frustrated and but at the same time, I'd already started working with my father on developing the idea for the Floortime Center. Um, and it was something he had thrown out when I was younger, but it really didn't speak to me then. But I had a friend named Tim Bleeker from college who had already been following some of my father's footsteps in Chicago, working with my father's colleagues there, learning floor time, first working with a woman who ran a big OT practice and then going out on his own doing it. And it certainly felt more manageable having a friend and colleague to do it with. And it was. I mean, he had more practice and experience within certain outpatient clinics. I'd actually had more experience with the curriculum itself. So in the beginning, especially, we did balance each other very nicely. And then once I kind of started doing it, and I mean, it took me a couple years, but I saw the impact it has.
Yeah.
And that spoke to me because I saw we weren't just kind of kicking the can down the road to the next school year where someone else is going to have to deal with this child's lack of conceptual awareness. And now these kids were actually not becoming more independent, but becoming more human being in the sense that they were able to think and plan and organize and socially connect and all of these elements that we associate with being kind of a happy, productive human that so many kids couldn't access. And once they started accessing these experiences by building deeper relationships with their caregivers and parents and making friends, it was like this whole new world existed to them. And they were acting out less, they had less meltdowns and aggressive behaviors. I mean, so I use the word they're more human, and I say that kind of playfully, but the truth is they got to have more of the experiences that are associated with the human condition that separate us from, single cellular organisms.
Yeah, no, it's great. My dad's big figure in my life. Just one more thing about him. What's the main insight, like a unique insight that he left on you? Because it was over a decade you worked together, right?
Yeah, I mean, if probably low. I mean, I always joke like I was kind of working with him ever since I was a young child, um, and not by my choice certainly, but basically, the biggest thing that I think I learned from his work, because he was very different as a father. I'll just be completely honest. His work as a medical professional is very different than his time with us as a caregiver. And he did start to take a page out of his own book when we got older, and even in our adolescence, when I think he realized his old school heavy-handed style of child rearing was no longer working for us, and he literally took a page out of his own book. But I'd say the most important thing that he kind of left me with was this idea that that these relationships matter. That these relationships that we have from being a young child, with our caregivers, with our friends, with our nannies, every one of these experiences sets us forward on a path to have more experiences or fewer experiences of a similar type, dependent on our perception of those experiences, whether it was exciting and nurturing, whether it was stressful or anxiety provoking or scary, whatever the outcome was. That was kind of his gift to the world that a lot of people don't really realize. Back in the 70s, he said for the first time that kids have emotions at birth, and their relationships stimulate those emotions and drive us on a path of development.
Yeah, that's great. So, what are the major changes that you've observed and, how developmental challenges are approached since everything was first developed until now?
You know, some of the biggest changes that I've seen, and you're talking more in terms of just the intervention itself, or
Right.
yeah. Um, one of the biggest elements of the intervention that most people actually don't fully understand, and most actually, there's other versions of floor time out in the world that we do not support that ignore this component, even though he wrote extensively about it, is that in intervention, a lot of people talk about intervention these days about being child-centered. Well, that's great. But what that means practically is that it's not up to the adult to teach a specific skill or outcome, because that's no longer child-centered. That's still adult-centered learning. You might let the child pick the activity, but if you're still teaching them something within that activity that you want them to learn, it's not child-centered, it's adult-centered. Or adult-led teaching. Um, and so what true child-centered learning is our role is to facilitate learning by being a participant in joining their world and creating a shared experience that allows them to think, problem solve, create, adapt. Unfortunately, a lot of people claim they're using my father, but don't integrate that concept. And while they may follow the child around and let the child make decisions, they're not actually participating with them in the same way that my father envisioned.
Gotcha. So, what are some of the trends that you're seeing in early childhood intervention and development?
One of the big trends is the community is moving more towards a child-centric kind of framework where we're looking more at the individual child, less at the diagnosis, which is exactly what needs to happen because, especially with a diagnosis like autism, there's a famous saying, once you meet one person with autism, one child with autism, you met one person with autism. And the reason is autism is a symptomatic diagnosis,
Yeah.
right? You could have 50 different reasons for with 50 different people for exhibiting the same symptoms, but those symptoms are going to qualify you as autistic. However, the reason you might be evidencing them would be unique to those individuals. So one individual might have had trauma in their background. One individual might actually have a very sensitive nervous system that they were just biologically pre-programmed with. One individual might have been experiencing neglect as a young child. And one individual might have a high level of sensitivities to certain foods or allergies or even a lower immune system. So they're constantly getting sick and that's affecting their development. And so within a child-centered framework, we have to be treating each individual not by their diagnosis, but by who they are as an individual human being. And I think that's a trend that's just begun, but still the intervention side of things haven't really caught up with it because most interventions are adult-led cookie cutter where they want to put the kid into kind of this framework and say, learn these skills.
So, speaking, on autism, do you think over the past decade has that understanding of treating, these children with autism, have you seen like, an evolve, I guess it evolve over the past decade, or do you still feel that they're kind of stuck in the past?
A little bit of both. I mean, I wish I had more confidence that we weren't still stuck in the past. But in 2019 and 2020, the Department of Defense did an audit of their spending for TRICARE Insurance, which is their big military insurance company, and they spend around $350 million a year on behavioral services for kids with autism. They found both years that 75% of the kids receiving ABA treatment made no progress and 11% lost ground out of $350 million being spent of taxpayer money on ABA services.
Yeah.
Now, you would think after 2 years of that happening, they would change the recommendations and availability of different interventions, but they haven't. And so they're still paying for ABA, a medically, a known, not ineffective medical intervention. Yeah,
Unbelievable. Unbelievable.
yeah, I know.
So now I love the success stories. I have success stories of patients that I've seen. Pick one out. I know you probably have a bunch, but like that one memorable success story that shows the impact of what the Greenspan four-time approach actually has on these children.
I'll share two because one of them I think people either won't believe or won't like. A couple years ago, a mom came to me. Had just gotten a diagnosis of her daughter, and this is before they had all the different level one, two, three, and four stuff out there. But she was a child who was kind of probably somewhere in between level two and three. It was kind of moderate to more significant. And she was 2.5, and she was evidencing a lot of the classic symptoms, right? Poor eye contact. Her attention was all over the place, meltdowns, a lot of sensitivity to boundaries or anything else. So it was very, very difficult to connect with this little girl. But we did get her to connect. I mean, without forcing her to do anything, we found playful inroads into her world, and that allowed us to create a shared world. And we did it the first day we met her, as we always do with new families. We show them the impact that this could have. But doing it that one day doesn't always translate to a long-term success story because it then requires application of the principles and program regularly for a period of at least 1 to 2 years, depending on the child's level. Um, and this mom literally turned to me and she said, I see the impact that this can have. What do I need to do from here? She said, does my daughter have a chance of living a normal life? And I said, well, regardless of her diagnosis, I think all children have a chance of living a normal life as long as we can reduce their stress and help them feel more secure and stable in who they are as individuals. And that's a broad statement, but it basically encapsulates all of the different variations of what can be achieved therapeutically. But with this little girl in particular, I knew from previous experiences, we can pretty much anticipate the progress that a child can make if a really holistic, intensive program is implemented. And I told her that. I said, listen, I can't promise any outcomes, but I can tell you that if you do exactly what this program dictates and you really follow this advice to a T at home, at the office, take our advice on school, which was holding her out of school until she was older and more able to participate socially. If you follow those rules, we're going to create the optimal program. So I said, well, let's start there, right? Then we'll see what her learning curve looks like and where she could end up. And sure enough, now I'd say only 10 to 20% of parents truly follow that that very rigid program, because it's not rigid in application, but it does require you breaking from some of the norms, like not putting your child in a preschool,
Yeah.
like not just putting them around kids for the sake of socializing them, because they're actually being pushed further away from a lot of kids, or they're learning to be more fragmented and all over the place because they don't know how to interact. It would be like me plopping you in another country saying, oh, you're going to learn Chinese because I put you in China. Well, over time, yeah, maybe you will, but if you're a young child who doesn't have language to begin with, you're probably not.
Yeah.
And literally one of the diagnostic elements of autism diagnosis is that children are not learning naturally from their environment. Yet we all think that putting them in a classroom around kids is going to help them naturally learn these skills, and it doesn't. So this mom listened, and after about 1.5 to 2 years, this little girl no longer qualified for being on the autism spectrum.
Wow.
Now, I'm not saying that's possible for every child,
Yeah.
but we've seen it more than once. We've seen it more than twice. We've seen it every year. A few kids and a few families really do follow through. That being said, other success stories that we've had just involve a child truly becoming comfortable with who they are and the parents learning to accept them for who they are and making progress along the continuum that they're capable of, right? The first story is the more extreme version.
Yeah.
The traditional, more 80% of what we see is kids having happier, more fulfilling lives because they have relationships, they're more adaptive, they're not rigid and repetitive, and they can handle some of life's stressors, but they probably will still often need some support. But nonetheless, when the parents and the caregivers in their lives start understanding them as individual human beings instead of seeing them as having a deficit or something that needs to be taught,
Yeah.
we see massive changes there too. Yeah.
Gave me the chills with that first one, and even the second.
Yeah.
That's what it's all about. Every child deserves just the happiness in their life.
Right.
Yeah.
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 And then so just quickly, that was one of my father's big kind of statements. He would say, listen, I know not all kids can become what he would call a superstar, which were the kids he worked with who ended up basically no longer manifesting the symptoms of autism. Whether they're still on the spectrum or not is a bigger conversation we can have medically, but they no longer qualified symptomatically for being on the autism spectrum. And there's these kids are out in the community now. Some are married, so they have advanced degrees, they're kids, and these are kids who were diagnosed on the autism spectrum, and no longer is it visible that but none of what was happening with them was trying to treat the symptom, right? We were always treating the core of what was identified as leading to the symptoms. But his belief was that every single child he ever met, regardless of the severity of their diagnosis, was capable of living a happier, more fulfilling life if they had relationships. And that's what I talk about the human condition. Humans are social beings that are supposed to have relationships, and we rely on these relationships for our nurturance and happiness.
Yeah, no, it's a great message and makes all the sense in the world to me. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I know you touched a little bit about, the kid-centric, adult-centric, right? But is there anything else you would like to touch on with how the Greenspan Floortime approach differs from other intervention methods?
So what I was sharing before about it being a thinking-based intervention, and this is kind of one of the most operative elements of what makes Greenspan Floortime, particular my father's version of Floortime,
Mhm.
which is called Greenspan Floortime now because Floortime's generic, and a lot of people call it DIR Floortime and other things, which is no longer his version. Um, Basically, the fact that we're encouraging the use of the prefrontal cortex, which is where a lot of our thinking takes place, decision making, planning ahead, problem solving,
Yeah,
even our ability to regulate our emotions, keeping ourselves calm, right? It works in tandem with our amygdala, which is where our big emotions are, where we process rewards and things of that nature. So within my father's structure, I don't think he knew this at the time when he was creating this back in the 70s and the 80s. Um, is this concept that if the child is doing the thinking, if they're making a decision, if they're coming up with a solution, if they're figuring out what to say and do, even how to move their body, because we're trying to pretend, they want something open and we're pretending we can't open it, and then they touch our hand to indicate, here, let me help you. Every one of those little steps, gestures, solutions to a problem, idea that they have, these are all the foundational skills that lead us to higher levels of cognition. But without them, we become these very passive participants where instead of actually activating our prefrontal cortex, which helps us anticipate and predict what we're going to do next, instead, we just become these robots who know what the answer is, but don't know the process to get there. And so that piece that, again, so many people misunderstand is the key ingredient that drives, I think, the best therapies these days, but I've yet to see it integrated in other therapies.
yeah, yeah. All right. So three locations, is that correct? You have three locations?
Well, so we have actually, we had three locations in the DC area.
Okay.
We also have a licensee in South America, in Santiago, Chile,
Okay.
and we have partners also all around who we've worked with. But now we have two locations in the DC area
Okay.
and those partners and licensees. I always say we're a small mom and pop shop with kind of a global reach.
Yeah.
We would like to stay small because we never want to become one of these big kind of companies that can't focus on quality and what's best for the kids. To go back to an earlier question you asked me, sorry, this is the one thing that my father instilled in me before he passed away was he said, you'll never go wrong if you make decisions that are based on what's best for the child first. Um, and we've stuck to that even in the toughest times of our business when we were in the red and in debt. And we could have easily reconfigured to do things that were more profitable because we don't run our business in the most profitable way, which is having like one big therapy room and a lot of kids and therapists at the same time. We have different rooms for every child if they want them and need them. But it's not cost effective because
Yeah.
we need more space. But that's gotten us through the toughest moments. And we've seen our friends in the small business outpatient clinic space shut down shop, over the years because they haven't had the organic support that we've had from the families that we've worked with. And they know that that's how we operate, and that's kept us around.
Gotcha. Yeah, I was leading into, with multiple locations and whatnot. It's
Yeah.
about the high standards, the high quality care, all about the patients, right? So,
Yeah.
what does that kind of give and take look like with the increased, families and serving more families, but also
Right.
keeping those standards there? And you kind of touched on it right there because that's the main focus of what drives the business, right? Drives the company.
Yeah. And what we did when we started expanding, we looked at a couple different models of kind of how we could expand. And we knew we needed to open at least one or two other clinics in the DC area because one of the things for anybody who lives in DC, people don't like to drive in and around DC. You
Yeah.
know, you kind of live in your area, you stay in that area, you try not to cross if from Maryland into DC or DC into Maryland or Virginia if you don't have to. And even there's boundaries you typically try to operate within because traffic's so bad and you don't want to spend so much time in the car. So we started opening satellite locations. They weren't fully operations where we had an admin there, we had billing there, and everything else. We ran everything from our central office, and then with the other two locations, they were smaller, so we didn't even have sometimes a waiting room. We just have the therapy and the treatment offices, and it actually worked really, really well. And our staff would rotate locations. So they actually got to go to different places. Some of them didn't love the fact that they weren't in the same place each day, but some loved the fact they got to go to a different place with new families, new equipment, and different things of that nature.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's exciting switching it up. I go to 4 different offices. So I'll tell you, there's never
Right.
one around here.
Yeah, I'm sure.
All right, so we'll start to wrap things up, but just the vision. You talk about having, the Floortime Center having a global impact, right? But also staying true to the core values. What do you see in the future for the Floortime Center?
Hopefully continued organic, slow growth. I think when we've grown quickly in the past, it's been hard to adjust to. And I think as like we actually did very well with many of the families during quarantine because the kids actually weren't in school. So we were actually working with them more and we had new referral sources coming at us every day. It's like, wow, I just met this kid you've been working with and I've never seen so much progress.
Yeah,
And that was actually true. Multiple doctors in the DC area were like, what's going on here? But the reality was we were no longer competing with the child's schedule for school and other things where we could really focus in on nurturing their individual growth and health. Whereas school was there as, they were getting a little bit out of being there. I'm not disagreeing with that, but they weren't getting as much out of a one-on-one intervention or a small group setting intervention.
yeah,
That was more manageable for them. So, it'd be like, again, saying that, putting a child in 15 to 20 kid classroom versus a 5-child classroom, right? Every child will get more out of the 5-child classroom than the 20-child classroom.
absolutely. All right, so I'll give you the floor for two last questions, right?
Yeah,
And you've hit the first one at home multiple times. So
yeah.
have one core lasting message to the audience, and then also let them know where they can find more information about you.
Yeah, I mean, I think the most important thing is don't listen to everybody. Don't, do your own due diligence. Come to your own conclusions about what's best for you and your child and your family. And it may mean have nothing to do with us, right? That's fine
Yeah,
if that's your conclusion. But do your own research, not just by listening to people, and definitely not by just listening to doctors. As much as I love doctors, my father was one,
yeah,
he would be the first one to tell you, don't listen to every adult, doctor or professional in your field, because not everybody has the same framework of understanding. Some people are looking at this stuff strictly from a behavioral standpoint. How do we decrease this behavior, increase this behavior? Some are looking at the holistic health elements. Okay, how do we nurture this child's health so that these behaviors don't manifest naturally? Some are just looking educationally. How do we teach the child this missing thing? And so, unfortunately, everybody will give you advice from different perspectives. And if you start trying to take all that in, it's going to be overwhelming. And you'll end up doing a more what's called a fragmented program where you're pushing and pulling your child between many different learning styles. And that will not lead to the most growth. So pick a lane that you feel comfortable with, do your own research, become your child's best advocate. We're certainly here to help with that. And the best way to contact us is to go to our website, which is thefloortimecenter.com. And we, just so you all know, we offer free intake consultations so you can get a sense of what floor time is without any financial commitment. And it does require getting the parents involved, sending a video of what's happening at home, and then doing a live session virtually in person. But like I said, I've told parents right away who told me they probably won't be able to come to us because of the distance. I said, still do the free intake with me.
yeah,
I'm happy to give it to you.
yeah. No, that's impressive stuff, Jake. Thank you for the
Thank you.
time. I appreciate you coming on the show. And listen, best of luck with everything in the future. All right.
Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate you having me.
All right. Have a good
All
night.
right. Thanks, Nicholas. Bye.